And for all of you that are familiar with all things conflict, you'll know that we drop an episode every week. And then just occasionally I meet somebody or I'm introduced to somebody who just has a lot of depth, or somebody that I just want to have a much longer conversation with, something where we can really tease out the topic. And this is one of those episodes. And I'm really delighted to welcome you, to introduce you to Shannon Pearson from Reform IQ. Shannon has worked in the manufacturing and construction industry for over 10 years, and she's a seasoned professional at conflict resolution and helping people work through their arguments. And you can imagine sort of manufacturing and construction industry, that has its own culture. And what she's really good at is getting teams to sit together and work through their disputes productively in order to make better performance. So join me with Shannon Pearson as we take a deep dive into the topic of workplace disputes. Shannon, amazing that we're having this conversation.
It's great to see you.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't known each other that long, and we got introduced by a mutual friend. Mm-hmm. And we had this conversation, and I was just like, this isn't just an ordinary podcast episode. This is a special, It was a real meeting of hearts and minds. But first, let me introduce you. I'll probably do a rubbish job at it, and then you can fill in the blanks.
Sounds good.
Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So, Shannon, you're the founder of Reform IQ. Mm-hmm. And I think the main thing that stands out is that you've been in the manufacturing and construction industries for over 10 years, working at the coalface, I would call it, trying to change workplace culture. What a place to get experience. I mean, the wisdom, the knowledge, the experiences, the stories, some of which you probably won't be able to tell, but
no.
Amazing. And perhaps you could just fill in the blanks about, your extraordinary career.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, it is great to see you and great to continue the conversation, because we really did connect in those first discussions. My experience, I like to call it a bit of a gypsy road, because I really just fell in love with corporate culture and the work of it quite organically and by accident. Stepping into manufacturing settings and thinking that if I could just help business owners get enough processes and procedures defined and in place, surely people would follow them. And then the culture would just click. And that is not at all what happens. It turns out that when people aren't happy, it doesn't really matter what your process and procedures are. They're just unhappy. So learning that from the inside, I call it the belly of the beast, being inside of that and watching people really get into a very dark place in their roles because they just didn't have the supports and didn't feel like they really mattered. And I just got very, as I call it, scrappy about it, in the sense that we all want to know that we matter somehow. And in a workplace settings, it goes beyond that to, we want to know that what we do and what we contribute every day matters to something bigger and contributes to that bigger picture. From my experience, when people don't have that, that's when the culture really starts to suffer and can move quite quickly into toxicity. So that is kind of where I tripped into it and started to study it, really became quite passionate about it. And then realized that when a culture is not healthy, conflict is very quickly going to show up. And learning how to navigate conflict led me into becoming a mediator. And that has just been such a great journey of self-reflection, self-learning, but also in service to helping people learn how to embrace conflict, because that's really where the connection can start.
Yeah, and I think that that's where, listening to you, talking about beginning by imagining if you put all the right policies and procedures in place and you give people systems that, everyone should be able to just, be the cog in the wheel and the machine
Yeah.
will turn and all the rest of it. And hearing that journey to then, crossing over into the sort of learning a bit more about conflict and we'll go into, our own stuff, and now it
Yeah.
touches our own stuff, surely. And then
Mhm.
realizing, and I mean, that's just such a great quote, you can, if people are unhappy, the culture is neither here nor there. It's
Yeah,
people are unhappy, they're unhappy. No
entirely.
form or filling
Yeah.
anything in triplicate is going to make a difference.
No, and also in that same tone, there's no pizza party or team building exercise that's going to be a fix, so to speak. They may contribute, they may help, they may be a great gesture with the most, best of intentions. Um, and I don't want to put down team building because I think it's important. But if you're not actually getting to the root of what is eroding the culture, that it will not be a sustainable method to manage it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that whole back to front. And I think there was a sort of a lot of it began in the 90s, providing pool
Mm-hmm.
tables and fridges of
Yeah,
beer and stuff
yeah.
that was supposed to make your workplace really attractive, and give you the edge.
And it's interesting because when I think of the 90s, I my career in early 2000, like right at the year 2000, I went into the financial industry. And thinking back on that time, that is when the tech bubble was going on in the 90s, and the tech bubble burst. And in the financial sector, it was really impactful because there was so much money being made in these tech companies. And that's from my memory, and this is just my lens. Other people might remember it differently, but I just remember thinking like people talking about having Google having a slide in their corporate office, and all these things that came out of that tech world. And that was very specific. It was in that very isolated era, and also very isolated sector that actually didn't fare well at the end of the 90s. And in that fight, and then transitioning into the impact of that in the financial industry, a lot of people lost a lot of money when those
Mm.
companies fell apart. So yes, that did happen, and also it wasn't sustainable. I mean, it's you can see it in the history of how the companies performed, and that it actually wasn't really the the great tool that it was thought to be. So
Well,
it
you
was a little
can you can use
efficient.
any amount of window dressing you like. That's the
Yeah,
point. It's all
yeah,
window dressing.
yeah.
Um, at the end, people are people, and I'm just going to come back to that. If people are unhappy and you fail to notice, first of all, notice. Second, hear people. Third, actually do something about it.
Mhm.
It's a virus.
I completely agree. And the two things that you just pointed on was awareness. Are you aware of what's happening with the people in your company or on your team? And are you listening? And the listening piece is so critical. And that is where I spend a lot of time. I spend a lot of time listening. I also spend a lot of time encouraging others to understand the difference between hearing and listening. It's a big difference, and it's a skill. Active listening is a very important skill in leadership, but you don't have to have a leadership title to want to be an active listener. It's one of the, I would say, most important skills I developed through mediation and through just being in those very volatile environments. Um, I don't. How do you feel about that? I mean, there's so many skills to bring forward, but active
Yeah.
listening has been one of the most important for me.
So let's start with that one, because I think it's at the heart of everything. And when I'm teaching the dialogue roadmap, we start with listening, we go back to listening, whatever else we're doing, listening sits at the heart. So it always begins with listening. And then, I might want to give someone feedback, or I might want to give someone some empathy, or I may, I'm navigating, I'm dancing.
Yes.
So a great phrase that I use is, if you're having a conversation with somebody, are we dancing or are we wrestling? That's one way of noticing. And then whatever the person says, I go back to listening. You don't just listen and then start strategizing. It's a continuous process. But your question was, how do I feel about that? I think it's number one, it's at the heart. It's but you see, I think we got contaminated or traumatized by listening in school, because you see, listening in school to the teacher came with the threat of punishment.
Yeah.
And so we couldn't actually listen, because we were spending a lot of time working out what we could get away with, what would absolutely we would be caught for, and how bad would the punishment be. So we were never taught listening in relationship. And I think that for me is very key, listening in relationship.
That's a beautiful way of saying it. I also believe and have seen listening, it's kind of downplayed a little bit, or maybe not downplayed. It's not embraced with the importance that I think it should be, because of all this, seek to understand and all these sayings. But really, when I've sat with people and brought that up, like the actual skill of active listening and exercising it to really truly understand another perspective, it doesn't always work. A lot of times I come across that idea of people wanting to step into the conflict, but they're stepping into it to win. And one of the ways we were introduced was through our mutual friend who saw my TED Talk. And that was part of the message I really wanted to share with the world was conflict is not about winning. It's about understanding. So if conflict is there and you're not taking a moment to step back and truly listen and understand what's being said, well, then you're just creating an argument, right? So conflict is actually a very constructive tool when there's a healthy environment for it to be established. And that starts, as you said, it all starts with being aware that you should be listening. And then when you're listening, being able to actively be there, like be present and truly understand what is being shared with you.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been a large part. I mean, there was a time in my life where I didn't listen to anybody. It was my way or the highway, right? Okay, I come from Mediterranean parents, and we're all hot-headed, and we all shout at each other. But luckily for me, I found some other ways in life, and it's been a big part of my life for about 30 odd years. Over 30 years now, and it served me so well. It buys you time. It's that gap between hearing something and reacting, and then going, hang on a minute, have I truly heard? Let's show some curiosity. Let's be interested. It's like a muscle, because when you first start doing it, it's really hard. And then what I've found is over the years now, I'm present, I'm engaged, I'm there, I'm receiving. So I call it being on receive.
Okay. Oh, that's a great way of looking at it. And that actually dovetails nicely with what I was saying, is when you're being receptive, when you're on the receiving end of what's being communicated, but you're actually not listening. You're getting ready. You're like, oh, I'm going to use that thing that was said 5 seconds ago and I'm going to blast them. That's where things fall apart. And that's where that, even if you get to a place of settling the conflict or the conversation down, what I believe happens is all that energy of, or the tension, let's just call it the tension between the people, slips under the surface and it lives there. It doesn't always come up. It's not always volatile, but it's there. And that tension is there and it's alive. So really when engaged with somebody and you're on opposite sides of a discussion point or you're debating something, it is a muscle that needs to be exercised. I couldn't agree more. It's uncomfortable when you first start doing it. That nature to win, especially if you're driven or competitive, which I am, and I work with a lot of people who are. It's slowing down and taking inventory of knowing what you're wanting to accomplish. But I love the fact that you use the word curiosity, remaining curious enough that what you think, feel, and believe it to be true may not be. Or it may be, there may be a shift in the context of it. I spent years avoiding conflict, most of my adult life, honestly. It just was so uncomfortable for me, and it really didn't serve a purpose at all. I thought I was protecting myself. I thought if I just, pleased and did the right thing and did, but again, everything went under the surface. And when it went bad, it went very bad. So that's another point, is learning these skills to resolve conflict also brings up a lot of personal things for people. So it isn't a quick, you don't follow, it's not follow steps 1 through 3 and repeat. It's not that. It's an incredibly personal experience.
So that's I mean, I've heard so much, and I'm kind of like, oh, we could go here, and we could go there, and we could go there. I think I would like to. I don't want to go to the personal stuff just yet, because I think that we'll get there even deeper, if you know what I mean. Yeah. But let's go back to listening. I think let's stay with listening and how that takes us into all the other areas. Words like curiosity, being interested. And I think the word that came up for me as you were speaking is how much we make assumptions.
Oh.
Most conflict is based on a set of assumptions. And the way I talk about that is, what is it I'm telling myself about the other person that they don't know, but they can obviously smell something on me? And what is it that I'm telling myself that they're telling themselves about me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that on its own is a novel.
But it is. I think that is where the rubber meets the road, honestly, is the amount of assumptions I know I make. And then I have to stop and go, what is true? Or is it just my instinct? Is it my perception based on my own experiences? And really getting clear on what it is and being responsible for that, right? Like really owning it. My instinct is generally good, but it's not 100% of the time, which isn't always a great feeling when you make a wrong call, but that's being human. And I think the more human we show up, especially in mediation, when you can just actually say, like, man, I don't know, I'm on this journey with you. Like, let's walk through it together. being real about it and just saying, as human beings, there's a lot that comes into it. There's a lot of layers and a lot of variables that impact those conversations. And assumptions are going to happen. I think it's a fairly natural thing. I think, especially when you get into workplace leadership, the important thing is to own it and to, again, like we talked about, be aware that it's happening and make sure that you're managing it responsibly as a leader.
Yeah, so that's, yeah. And I mean, there is it's like, we talked about listening being a skill and a muscle that you exercise and you build strength in it, and then it becomes a way of life. Mm-hmm. But the same thing with assumptions, it's you have to get to know yourself well enough to know what your assumptions are, what your triggers are, what the boundaries of your tolerances are, and whether that's directly related to what's happening or whether that's our past stuff coming in. And I'll talk more about that. But I was minded to tell you a very funny story, actually, if I may.
Yes.
Just to round off the listening part. So in the system I use, we always repeat back what we've heard somebody say. And we try as closely as possible to use the words. So not summarising or paraphrasing, because at that very first step, I don't understand and I don't have to understand. The understanding comes as we build the relationship. So we use the phrase, so what I've heard you say is, and I did some work with on a re-entry program in New York, and I was working with some absolutely fantastic people. Some had been formerly incarcerated, some had been involved with gang work, with gang activity, in their lives, but all people who were kind of coming out the other side and finding another way in the world. And I made some lifelong friends there. And this phrase of, pausing and not just reacting and just being able to say, this is what I've heard you say, just changed everything for a particular group. It was like
amazing.
Someone had switched the light on. And when we came to hand out certificates at the end of the training, they baked us a cake.
Oh.
The words, so what I've heard you say, iced on it. And I've never forgotten how that one thing turned things around for people.
It's usually, again, I mean, everything I share is, I recognize that it's just my own perspective of things, but I don't find that it's the great big giant, there's no big event that happens. It's those things that we would consider little moves. I call it moving the needle. And you keep moving that needle, you're going to find progress.
Yeah.
But it's in those little micro changes that lives change. It's in the little tiny steps where somebody all of a sudden has a spark of awareness that they didn't have before. It isn't always a great big colossal event that changes people. It's
there's that moment, isn't there, where suddenly, something lifts.
Yeah.
And go on.
It's one of my favorite parts of the work that I do, where I can see someone really, like, the wheels are spinning and they're finally like at a place where it's clicked for them, whatever the case might be. And it's usually been after multiple conversations of resistance, right? So, and that's another thing that we can get into, is this work it is not instantaneous. It is not a formula. It is a constant feed of service, right? Where you are giving and giving and giving. And so when you see somebody go, oh, I get, okay. And then off they go. So in many respects, it can be quite thankless because you invest a lot along the way. But the experiences I've had, it is so worth it when that moment happens. I'm just so happy for the individual because it can unlock from there. It unlocks everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I always, as I was listening to you and thinking, I sit with many people and I have sat with many people, hundreds, thousands of people in this work over the years. And one of the conclusions I came to is whoever I sit with, I'm simply meeting a version of myself.
Yeah.
I'm always just meeting a version of myself.
Yeah. And there's a saying, isn't there, about what I'll probably butcher it, so pardon me, but there's something about what we don't like in another person or what we're reacting to is really something within ourselves that we haven't actually come to terms with or made peace with. So I think that there's some definite truth there that when you're meeting people, or Abraham Lincoln, I think it was, that said, I really don't like that man. I'm going to have to get to know him better.
Yeah.
And those are really good practices for self-development, right? For self-awareness. But it's not as easy as it sounds, for sure.
It's not as easy as it sounds. It takes a lot of internal work, and I know that that's been a lifelong journey for me. And every time I think, I found a bit of enlightenment here, or, look, I've let go of this, or, there's no need to be upset about these things anymore. And then I think, that's great. And then there's another breakthrough and another breakthrough and another breakthrough, and it doesn't end. And it's beautiful and it's lovely, and it's and the more I do this, then the more I can be of service to others.
Yeah, entirely.
So I'd love to go back to this assumptions thing.
Yes.
Because one of the things that I found is people make not even just assumptions about the situation, but assumptions about titles and labels. Yes. So a really good example of that was, I was doing, I was meeting with some people, and one person was, complaining about their dad. My dad should do this and, whatever. And my dad's, whatever. And there was a lot of judgments or whatever. And actually I found what was really important was to say, tell me what dad means. What is a dad? Who is a dad? What do you believe a dad should or shouldn't do?
Right.
And because, what a dad may or may not do when you're 5 may be different to when you're 25.
Yes, and it should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think we do, again, get into a lot of messy conversations based on expectations that are not clear. And I look at that purely from the lens of a workplace. And, for example, in a manufacturing setting that I've worked in past, unionized, large national union presence, which in that setting was really quite helpful because it was what it was. It was the union determined that these were the roles and this was the expectation of performance. What it doesn't tap into is the expectation of what, when we interact in the workplace, what does that expectation mean to the people that are on the receiving end of it? And when we're not dealing with leadership development and people get a sense of authority and it is not managed well, it is not handled well, the recipient of that management or that leadership can often get really disgruntled. So that gets into power tripping and all the accusations when really this person in leadership is going, I'm just trying to meet the expectations in my role. Like I'm just trying to do my job, but it's not about that. It's about how they're doing it. And it's
Exactly.
the how factor that makes all the difference in the world. So I learned that from a VP of HR in a contract I had years ago. And he said, it matters how we get there. And we were dealing with a very unfortunate situation. And he had to deliver a lot of bad news. And he would just always say, it matters how we get there. It matters how we get there. And everything was delivered with great care and compassion. And I learned a lot from that, because that was kind of one of those early days of me embracing culture and going, no, I'm gonna strong arm this and turn it around, and really not understanding the delicate nature of conflict in the workplace. And that was kind of one of my groundbreaking moments where I really learned a lot from him, that it matters how you get there. And it's not about your title. It's not about your experience. It's really that human connection and how you treat each other in any given moment, regardless of other circumstances.
The how, there's and the cost to the relationship. You just reminded me actually of a very old joke that you just remind me. It's a sergeant major who has a load of young soldiers or privates, and he has to break the news to one of the soldiers that his mother has died. And he doesn't know how to do it. So he brings all the soldiers together and he says a terrible joke. And he says, all those soldiers with a mother take one step forward. Jones, why did you step forward?
Oh, no.
It's a terrible joke. But, I see the equivalent of that in workplaces.
Yeah. The equivalent of that is definitely a part of the reality. But that was one thing I also wanted to get your input on is people don't make it easy either, right? Like, people can really test us and can really, like, quite frankly, be jerks. And they know where the buttons are, and they're going to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. And that is ultimately where you can see the separation in where a person's at in their development and how they lead or how they show up, just as a peer in the workplace. Are they going to rise to that, or are they going to separate themselves from it in a healthy way? And it is not easy. I will say that. I have faced, and I'm sure you have too, endless antagonizing situations and comments to see if just let's see if we can break her. Like that kind of antagonistic behavior, it gets at you. It definitely does. It changes the nature of a relationship, but it also, from my experience, has made me double down on that personal awareness and owning it and recognizing that I'm here to provide a service. I'm here to provide support, and I chose it. So am I going to do it, or am I going to not? So either do it or move on. Like, it's not, and I have said this quite a bit in workplaces, delicately, but I do say it with a little bit of a smirk and a nudge, is like, hey, it's not prison. Like, if you're that unhappy, let's get to the root of that, or you have some decisions to make with your life. It is not a license to make everybody else's world unhappy or disgruntled or whatever you want to call it. But man, it can get very trying, for sure.
So I look at that when you have somebody who's, perhaps a bit relentless, who's provocative, who's, looking to looking to increase the tension rather than to decrease. And so for me, I look at that from several different angles, and I can never know which one it is until I get to know the person.
Right.
But, for some people, this might be the safest place to let it all out. I used to say that in schools when, teachers would tear their hair out with one particular child and get exasperated. And I'd say, you've no idea what's going on in this child's life. Your classroom might be the safest place to let it all out. Now, of course, now we're all talking about adults, and it's not appropriate. Just because it's the safest place, it's not okay. And so we have policies and procedures and guidelines and, workplace codes of conduct. And when you take a job or a role, you've agreed and you've contracted to work within those boundaries. So that's one way in which I can talk to people about, when you decided that you wanted to work here, and and it said there was a code of conduct and an expectation that comes with all the benefits. What did you think was going to happen when you start treading all over those boundaries? Yeah. So I think that's one thing. Another thing can be, I like to look at people's conflict cycles. So I do like to take my time over this work because, and by conflict cycle, I mean, how long can a person sit in the good times before they need to bring in some tension? Now, for some people, that's 5 minutes. Yeah. And for some people, it's seasonal. Yeah. I can see a 3-month seasonal cycle. Yeah. So, and so if I'm every 5 minutes and you're every 3 months, I am going to look like the problem.
Yes. And the other person will be exhausted.
Yeah.
From just trying to dodge and stay out of the way.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I like to talk about, because I go quite deep with people if they'll allow me, if they want to really make changes. So as well as a conflict cycle, there's also something else which I call the intimacy barrier. And I don't mean, physical intimacy with your partner, with your romantic partner. What I mean is there's a zone of how close I can get to another human being before it's not safe.
Okay.
And so, I mean, for me, I come from, started work in the late 70s. So when I walk into corporates and I see these little hutches of, people having to work in such close proximity, I get claustrophobic, I couldn't ever imagine having to do that. But if you're putting that many people actually in physical close proximity, that can be really difficult.
It can be. And I also think it brings up a really important part of the work that I see quite often, which is the intergenerational workforce. So you are dealing with value systems from Gen Xers all the way to Gen Z and everything in between. And it's not to say, and I don't mean this trite at all, but there's a lot of, millennials got a bad rap, and now Gen Z is getting a bad rap. And, the boomer generation is, kind of like long in the tooth, and they're retiring, if not already there. As a Gen Xer, of course, I can relate the most to that. I'm older than Google, right? So I can't relate to a lot of the things that are going on for somebody that's a lot younger than me, coming in to an environment where everything is very close and exposed and shared. That's the only world they know. But when you put that butt up against somebody who, had boundaries, didn't share things, was from a completely different time, that's where I see a lot of friction showing up in that respect. Also, expectations of support. What does that look like for a younger generation is going to be entirely different than somebody that has 30 years of experience in the business. it's a really interesting time. And I know here in where I'm working specifically, there's a massive change going on economically, and the amount of people coming out of trades positions, retiring, there is a massive gap of people replacing that number, but also those that replace that number are going to be an entirely different mindset.
Completely different. Yeah. Completely. Yeah.
So the intimacy conversation is interesting. I would love, that's a whole other podcast though.
It really is. Yeah.
It really is, because it sparks so much internally, I believe, for people, but also the optics of that as well, right? And that optics really have an impact on culture.
So I'm saying you have this conflict cycle. People have a conflict cycle, and then they have an intimacy barrier, and that could be over anything. But how close can I get to you? Not just physically, but, some people are really generous and they want to get to know the people around them, and other people are really private and, they just want to come to work and do their job. And so you're putting all these people, into this container, and expecting them to get on, and that's the funny thing, is expecting people, expecting that a code of conduct or an employment contract, or that procedures and policies are going to that everybody's going to come to work with more than one brain cell and with some emotion and intelligence, and know what to do, and know how to use language, and know how to be around other people, especially the intergenerational cultural differences. And we don't know this. One of the things I talk about is there used to be a thing, and follow me on this, there used to be a thing called common sense, because common sense was when we all lived in the same village, our kids all went to the same school, we all ate dinner at the same time, we all, did our recreational activities the same way, right? That was common sense.
Yeah.
But we don't live like that anymore. I don't even know some of my neighbours. Some people, I went to the dry cleaners today and ended up finding out that he was from, the country he was from. I'd already made some other assumptions, and it was just great. But, I don't know what he thinks about certain views or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And then nobody teaches us how to navigate the world in the state it is. So for me, common sense no longer exists, because there's nothing common.
No. I couldn't agree more. Well said. I've never heard it put that way, but it makes such great sense. I think the most interesting thing I still look back on often is the idea that this work specifically, dealing with culture, dealing with conflict, and supporting people through that journey, that it's considered fluffy or kumbaya or soft, or like, it is some of the most gutting experiences I've had professionally. And I completely agree with you that the skills that, you learn through navigating this work can be taught. It really requires the awareness, back to how we started this conversation, people being aware that they exist and they're actually a thing. But also recognizing that this world that we're in now, that there isn't anything common, but there is access to information, and that plays on both sides of the fence for employers. So people have access to information and a very quick path to acting. So they can act against the company very, very quickly. So it's really important, and I think critical for businesses and business owners, leaders, to really keep in mind that the more that middle management level is educated in these skills, it's not just helping them do a better job, which is what most business owners want. They just want people to come to work and do their job. And yet that skill set at that middle management level to create that understanding of what is the common sense for this setting or this environment, and giving them the tools to navigate the tension and navigate the differences that show up, it's actually an investment, because when you don't have it and everything goes wrong, people can take action very quickly. And if you don't have everything buttoned down, it is now a liability. And that's where when people say, oh, aren't you HR? Isn't that, I used to take it personally. I used to get quite offended by it. And now I kind of say I'm a part of that. I'm an aspect of it. But the profession of human resources is a lot more than a company picnic, potluck, and a few check boxes. Like, it's an actual business department. And if it is not led by people who understand the context to the company, it's not great. It's not going to end well.
Totally. And for me, as I listen to you, the whole thing about, you can't just be nice to people one day a year, or throw some money at them or whatever. No. That's not gonna do it. Originally in the Industrial Revolution, the whole point was you were going to take people and make them factory workers, put them in manufacturing or whatever. And the whole idea was that the mindset was that everyone was replaceable, right? That was the point. You went along thinking you were replaceable. And you were led to believe this. If you don't like it, someone else can do this, But that changed because, as you said, people have been given access. People have been given access to law. People have been given access to their rights. People have been given access to psychology, to understanding themselves better and how they operate. And people want to exercise that knowledge, and they will exercise that knowledge.
They will. They will. And I think the staying informed on those matters is really critical. But also, back to the listening, is people are going to tell you what they're going to do. You just have to, you have to be quiet and still. And the cards will be shown. But developing that instinct as the person leading HR, as the person that's navigating the conflict in an environment, you also have the opportunity, and really, I believe, the responsibility to help them and say, I see where you're going. What can we do? What does it look like if that weren't to happen, if you were not to take that step, or you were not to take that action or make that accusation? What would have to be in place for that to happen? What do you need in order to not be that person that's going to take action? But I do have a rule, and it happened as early as yesterday, where if an employee says something or an individual says something to me, in the context of a role where I'm acting in the interest of an organization, I consider that to be acting in the interest of all, right? So yes, I'm hired by the company, but it's in the interest of everybody in that company that I serve everybody. But the moment you take a step to a threat or an accusation that is going to now put you on an opposite side, now it's no longer a conversation. Now we're on opposite teams. So I always, and I have coached this quite a bit, be careful not to weaponize an event and use it as a tool to get what you want. Define what you want and claim it. Ask for it. Find out, what can I do to get this type of outcome? But the second you turn into I do call it weaponizing. The second you weaponize the information and declare that you will come after or sue or what, now it's over. Now there's no real resolution. It's just you versus us. And I think that's a really unfortunate place to get to. But I see it happening more and more because people will throw something into Google at the very least, if not ChatGPT, and get a fraction of information that is completely out of context. Because again, they're sharing what they believe to be true. It may not be the full picture. So they're getting information as gospel. And I've had this happen a number of times, leading to legal action, where people are making accusations and then buffering it with, well, I've talked to my lawyer and we we're going to take action. We're going to do this, and all the story that comes with that. But if you're quiet and you know your stuff and you just listen and provide reason, say that, what is and what is not, generally it will diffuse it, or the person will just willingly go away. They will self-select. But if you make it about being right and them being wrong, you can quite often escalate it unnecessarily. And then more people are hurt, more time is wasted, more cost. It really serves very little purpose in the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I was minded to move the conversation somewhere else and think, what would be the ideal? So for me, when I think about workplaces, I think about anywhere in society, but, workplaces are very particular because you do have time and money resources that are, very critical. So, it isn't us all just kind of having a little argument, because there are other pressures that bear on us to meet deadlines, to work within resources, to, health and safety things. You could be in an industry where it could mean death for a customer, So there are lots of things, lots of different factors coming in that create pressure. And those things can be designed out. I mean, conflict can be designed out through proper management. Then we get to relationships. But, when you think about a workplace, there's always a little place to make coffee. There's a water cooler to have a drink of water. There's a meeting room, isn't there, to have meetings. There's, there's filing cabinets or whatever you have, the places to file things or whatever. So there are specific places for things. And if you think about sticking a number of people into a place called a workplace, for hours and hours every day with people they didn't necessarily choose to be with, then conflict is inevitable, right? It's not optional. It's going to happen. And so it's about how do we, I talk about conflict as being our greatest free resource, if only we knew how to tap into it.
I love that.
The greatest free resource we have as humans. And so I keep asking, if we know it's inevitable, there's some things we can design out. Where is the container for conflict? Where is it? We have to have, I say that every organisation needs a container for conflict with a person who facilitates, looks after, assists, who holds that part. And I think for the price of one decent salary doing that, you would actually correct an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering.
Agreed. I built my career on that exact theory.
So what would the ideal company, someone watches this podcasts and things. So there's a couple of women. I thought they were a bit dumb, but actually they're saying some quite intelligent things. Sounds like they kind of know what they're doing.
Might
I'm
know
a
a
bit
thing or two.
interested. Yeah. And we said, well, look, here's this ideal kind of company. How would you design it for them? Because I certainly know what I would do, and it would definitely be having somebody in charge of this stuff that knows what they're doing.
So I've done it a couple times, right?
Yeah.
And vetted myself as that person through the lens of HR. So you come in, and I think that's one of the things I've learned is when you come in through HR, people have an idea of who you are, they've already got you pegged, right? And so I would say an ideal would be really packaging that position as something that is collaborative with all departments. It isn't just under one. It has to live under one, probably from business, management standpoint. But really, it's here to serve all, that position. So that would be my first step, is to make sure that could happen. And how is that communicated? Because really the alignment with that intention, if it is not there, it's a setup for failure. It really is. It's a setup for failure at worst. At best, it's a setup for facing endless resistance to really showcase the merit of why you're there, right? So when you're facing that resistance and kind of pioneering your way through that position, the conflict that is faced in the position alone is likely going to be enough to choke a horse. Let alone all the other stuff that actually was the instigation for the position to come in the first place. So setting up for success means creating that alignment within the organization to say, okay, leaders or representatives of the company, this is what we're going to do. This is the purpose of the position. Do we agree to the, I call it the terms of engagement, right? The rules of engagement. What are we going to ask this person to accomplish? And what do we have to be willing to accept in order for that to happen? Those are grassroots that really would make that position successful. And if that's there, it wouldn't even matter what the company does, how big it is. If that is there, the rest of it is just change management and proper planning.
Yeah, all the normal stuff.
Yeah.
But somebody, and this sounds fluffy, but it isn't. It's somebody holding the hearts.
100%.
Just holding hearts. Holding hearts.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what your answer is to that same question.
So the same thing. I mean, funnily enough, I've had this idea that investors, when investors are going to invest in a company, they should also sort of make it a condition that this work is brought in, because when people start, everybody's on a high, aren't they? Because and they've got their investment, and and it's all going to be fantastic, isn't it? And then bit by bit, everyone had a different idea of what was going to happen and how it was going to happen, and then you get breakaway groups and tensions and and all sorts of things. And to build this in right at the beginning would be would be amazing, to really be able to showcase this. But I think it's the same as you. I think whoever has that role, while it would be a position within the company, there has to be some guarantee of their independence. They're not under threat of being fired if they don't do what someone says. Those details would have to be worked out, but how you structure it contractually, because inevitably some of that work will bring some discomfort to leadership.
That is the biggest barrier to entry, I believe, in this work is, you know, when I set Reform IQ up, I did it. I mean, it's meant to provide resources, tools, training, but it takes a leader to recognize that they need resources, tools, and training.
Yes.
That means they're not doing it, right?
Mm.
So as a lead, I often do, and I'm sure you do too, I often can project myself into a role as whether it be somebody I want to talk to or fix something with, something like that. So when I put myself in the shoes of a business owner who's running a large organization and says some of those triggering comments like, I just need people to come to work and do their job. Like, why so much drama? Like, can people just get over things? Like those really flippant comments. That's kind of my telltale sign of, ooh, you're not hitting the mark on these things. Getting that individual, that business owner from that place and acknowledging and saying, I bet you want people to just come to, but they're not going to, because you haven't addressed something. And I can get you there. I can get you to the point of identifying what it is and then work with you and your team to really lay the breadcrumbs to get to a better place. But it takes them being able to admit that they're not doing it.
So that's interesting. I mean, that's true. And I think that, you know, I've come up against that and, you know, because this still isn't recognised as its own discipline and skill and, you know, profession or whatever. It still isn't recognised. And so, you know, most people are wandering around the planet dealing with conflict as amateurs, you know. I mean, most people are amateurs at having a conversation, you know. Even just having a conversation with somebody, most people are amateurs. I mean, I delivered a training in prison and I was teaching some of the prisoners to be mediators and within the jail setting. And at the end of the 2 weeks, one of the feedback comments was, I never thought I'd spend 2 weeks having a conversation about how to have a conversation. And he was thrilled and delighted, you know. And, you know, I mean, in prison, sometimes people do this work with me and then they say, you know, if I'd known this, I would not be here. I would not be here if I'd known how to do this.
Entirely.
So, you know, that's the power of it. So when somebody says, I just wish people would come to work and do their work and kind of get on with it, you know, what I hear is there's a whole area of humanity that I haven't got the time, the resources, the capacity, the tolerance to deal with. And so my answer is outsource it. But not outsource it to a HR company who just does the general things. Outsource it, because there is a position within organizations that is just not being recognized.
Yeah. And it, you know, the HR professionals that I know and have worked with, they're, I call it dancing on the edge of the knife, right? Like you are here for the people, but you're serving the organization, and both can be oppositional. Like you can get your back against the wall really quickly. So,
and also even if you are the most wonderful HR department and you're very compassionate, you know, most employees say HR is simply the director's police.
Absolutely.
You know, that's how it's
you can't win, right? Like you can't really win there. I think the other side of it is, you touched on a good point with a business owner kind of not dealing with the things that are coming up. Most business owners I've dealt with, and even mentors I've had over the years, they're visionaries. They're big picture people. And the way I position it is, in order for you to do what you do,
Yes.
you shouldn't be doing
Yeah.
this.
Yes.
This is about roles and responsibilities,
Yeah.
but it's also about connection. And you as one human cannot connect to every single person.
Yeah.
You can have awareness,
Yes.
but you don't have enough hours in the day to run the company, manage the finances, do the whatever the relationship management is that you need to do for the company, and make sure everybody feels okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is not reasonable.
I once went into a company, and I was just accompanying a friend, okay, who was having a bit of had been fired or made redundant, and I hadn't followed due process. And I said, let's see if I could just sit down. And the CEO was in the meeting. And it was all over the purchase of a £15 fan in an area of an office where the air conditioning didn't reach. And this guy's wearing an Armani suit, he's the whole thing. And he's in the meeting arguing about a £15 fan. And, I had to say to him, I really wonder what state you're in when you're managing investment that you've just got of hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of investment, and I'm going back a long time, and you're in a meeting about a £15 fan. Yeah. Like, what stress are you under?
Yeah. And that's a hard conversation to have as somebody, like when you're embedded in an organization, you also have some self-protection, right? Yeah. Like, we're all human, so we want to know that we're safe and okay.
Yes.
But to have the hard conversations with the most powerful person in the organization, or anybody at the executive level that has power, like true, actual power to change the course of a person's trajectory, to have that hard conversation it's not easy. It is. You're going to talk about difficult things. How you get there matters, like I said, right?
How you get there matters, and also how to be unaware, to find yourself in a leadership position and not be open or willing to hear the dark stuff that's going on. Yeah. It's going to come and bite you on the bum sometime.
Oh, it'll show up. And it's, like I said earlier, it lives under the surface. And I've given a number of webinars and, speaking engagements where I talk about this. You see the iceberg slide show up on a PowerPoint more times than I care to remember. But it is the best representative of, or representation, I should say, of exactly how it works. Because what you're seeing are the actions, the transactions, the smiles, the anger, that you're seeing all the stuff up here, but you're actually not dealing with the root or what is creating it.
The source.
And really, the source of it comes down to, you can literally tie most of it back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Mm-hmm. And the number one thing that I have experienced people will go to absolute war over in a workplace is knowing that they matter.
Yeah. And another way of putting that for me is fairness. I mean, everybody goes to work with their fairness button very well switched on.
Yeah. But again, back to the intergenerational, we could talk all day.
Yeah.
When I was raised, it didn't, like, life isn't fair. Get over it. Get back to work. That's how I was raised. And so I've had to do this very delicate dance of softening that kind of dialogue that I was raised with, and understand that it actually doesn't have a place, because it doesn't, that kind of curt, direct hit actually doesn't work. It just drives it back under the surface. So it is truly about back to curiosity. What is fairness then? Let's name it. Let's put some hair on it and give it a name and make sure that we understand what fairness is in this setting.
In this setting, with these people, with the roles and responsibilities we have, with the boundaries we've set. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah.
So I think we're coming to the end of our time together, which feels very short.
Yeah, darn it.
Yeah, well, we'll do some more, I think. I think there's much more to dig into. But, you know, how can people find you? Where are you? Like, you know, I mean, but if someone wanted to talk to either of us, you know, where would they start? Because you're in Canada, aren't you?
I'm in Canada,
No,
yeah.
I'm in the UK, and I'm also in the USA occasionally.
Okay.
But,
okay. You can find me at Reform IQ. I have a team that makes sure I know what's happening there.
Great.
There's a lot of downloads there, right? So there's a lot of resources there that I don't necessarily see, but I don't see people go in there and get them. But I am notified on a weekly basis of how much is going out. So there's something called the Workplace Toolkit, Workplace Culture Toolkit. So there's a great resource there. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. Reform IQ is on Facebook. So I am on all the socials, and I love engaging with people, right? I love hearing what's not working. And, you know, providing that 15 or 20 minute kind of just meeting of the minds to say, give it a shot and see if it works. Helping where I can. And ultimately, if there is a company that is looking for the training and the development, it's okay to not have it figured out in your business. It's actually very, very common because you're there to run a business. And my business is to go into businesses and help them make sure that the running of it can happen while leaving everybody whole and complete.
Yes, I love that. I mean, I love that, while leaving everyone whole and complete. And the way I speak to that is by saying, okay, we're going to have a difficult conversation. We're disagreeing, or we're not seeing things the same way, and we're going to enter a place of trying to work this out. And it might not be easy and simple, but how do we look after each other while we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. But I do a very similar thing. I call it out and say, this is going to, you know, depending on the environment, I'll say something very somewhat playful, like, this is really going to suck. You know, I'm uncomfortable. You might get uncomfortable. Are we ready? Can we do this? Because I really want to, I want the outcome to be that we both understand each other and we can carry on with our day. That's generally all people need. They don't always take the information well, but if you give them a chance to take a deep breath and get ready for it, it's a lot easier to have a happy ending that way. But also,
sometimes it's important to have the conversation in sections. You know, let's just sleep on this bit. That, you know, you can feel like this is enough for today. Let's just sleep on this.
That's that instinct thing, right? Where you kind of go, like, I'm getting that you might have had enough. Let's take a break. What do you need? You know, let's and create that path forward. It is the breadcrumbs. It's not, you can't do it with one fell swoop. It's not fair.
So it's just back to the beginning again, isn't it? If someone's not happy, they're not happy, and it needs attending to, because, as you said, we all need to know we matter.
That's really what it boils down to, and the work that I've been doing, for sure.
Thank you. Wow, how amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to have this time together, and thanks for inviting me.
Wow, thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure to really just tease all this out with you.
Thank you very much. It was great to see you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.